Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar series titled Behind the Scenes with Lion Landscapes. I'm just so excited to see you all joining us. My name is Paul Subi. I'm a communication assistant at Lion Landscapes based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I will be your host for today. Our guest speakers will be Lion Landscapes joint CEOs, Professor Amy Dickman and Dr. Alayne Cotterill. In this episode, we will have Amy and Alayne take us through a behind-the-scenes conversation about Lion Landscapes' conservation journey in a very honest talk, exploring some of the successes and failures that have seen Lion Landscapes reach where it is today, with a clear focus and direction that is now well captured in a 5-year strategic plan. This will be done in form of a few questions that I will be asking our speakers directly. So we get started. How did you start out in your conversation journey, Amy?
Thanks very much, Paul, and thank you everyone for being here. And we're looking forward to talking to everyone more about conservation and Lion Landscapes. So I've always been passionate about conservation and particularly passionate about big cats for no particular reason. I grew up in Devon, where our biggest cat was like a slightly aggressive house cat, but always loved them and had this passion about going out to work, particularly in Africa, on big cats. And so I didn't quite know how to do that, but I had heard of the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at Oxford University, and it seemed that everyone there worked on big cats. It seemed really exciting. There was work on tigers, work on cheetahs and leopards. And so I was lucky enough, after doing a zoology degree, to go and to get a scholarship to Wild Crew. I remember going in and meeting David and being so excited that finally I was meeting one of my conservation heroes. I was going to start, working out on big cats. And I was a little upset when he told me that my study species was going to be the water shrew, which is a tiny little mammal in the UK. It's big for a shrew, but it's still about 15,000 times smaller than a lion. So it wasn't exactly where I wanted to be. But I had to do some time in the UK working on that, and eventually went out to get to join Laurie Marker and Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia, spent 6 years there, and then moved to doing the work in East Africa that's now become part of Lion Landscapes.
Oh, that's interesting. And how about you, Alayne?
So similarly to Amy, I had a passion from fairly young age. My dad had connections in Africa, and listening to his stories from quite an early age, I decided I wanted to go and work in wildlife conservation in Africa without really having any understanding at all of what that meant. So I was lucky enough to be taken to the Zambezi River Valley on a family holiday when I was 14, and it was just sort of love at first sight. Obviously very different to what conservation was actually like when I got into it, but definitely didn't change my mind about what I wanted to do. So after I graduated from university, I packed up and headed to Zimbabwe with sort of no plan and no money, but a lot of conviction. And a sort of lot of menial volunteer work later, I ended up in the right place at the right time. I was at a party for a new conservation area that was going to be opened up, and ended up talking to the person that was leading that, and they mentioned they had a problem with lions because lions were eating all their valuable prey species that they were reintroducing into this area. And being 21 and having sort of very little idea of my own limitations, I said, I'll sort that out for you. And for some reason, he believed me and gave me a break. And that was really my first lion project in Zimbabwe there.
All right, that sounds nice. Would you say you followed a clear path, a clear planned path, Alayne?
No, definitely no clear path. I think one of the issues with this field is that really are no clear paths. It's not like being a doctor or a lawyer where you have to, we have quite a clear path. You have to kind of figure it out as you go along. So, I mean, I had some lucky breaks and a supportive family that didn't try to talk sense into me. But even once you start, you do get a project and you start working on a conservation project, how to grow and develop that work is extremely unclear. And you often feel very isolated and alone physically and from professional support perspective. So there's just no sort of real instruction books for what you do when you break down in an open vehicle in the middle of nowhere surrounded by a pride of lions, or how to placate upset pastoralists after precious livestock or a family member has been killed. Or there's countless things that you face that you have, you know, no idea really how to do it. And so you make a lot of mistakes and you learn from them. I kind of liken it, I think, well, luckily, I think certainly I was cushioned by blissful ignorance at the beginning. I definitely thought I knew a lot more than I actually did. So it was a bit like walking on a mountain path in a fog, where you can only see the path immediately ahead of you clearly, but you really don't have any long-term vision at all at the beginning of what you're going to do. But you don't really know you're in a fog. But as you get more experience, the fog starts to lift and you could see all the horrendous crevasses that you narrowly missed falling down. And I kind of thought, oh man, this is a lot harder than I first thought. And I'm really not sure I'm equipped to do this. And basically it gets more and more humbling the longer I work in the African conservation field. Amy, I know the path was equally unplanned for you, but different again.
Actually, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of the similarities there where you don't know what you don't know at the beginning. And as you say, it's one of those things that people often ask, you know, how do I get to work, say, on big cat conservation? It feels a little bit like you're hiding some secret, but you're not. You know, there is no secret. It's one of those things of, it's such a diverse field. I think you really need to just, yeah, as you say, there's no clear path. There's not you can do A, B, and C and you naturally get there. You know, it has to be, everyone takes their own path towards it. And I was a bit like you. Obviously, I had, you know, 3 different degrees by the time I actually started doing a lot of conservation work. None of them are particularly useful at all. You know, I've barely ever relied on what I did in my zoology degree or any of the others. But what you do have to learn is those things in the field. And as you say, how to work with different people, how to just be open-minded to lots of different things and challenge your own assumptions as well as other people. So I think all of those skills, just the ability to be reactive and everything, are the way to carve that career. And when I say to people now, the best thing you can probably do is make the connections with as many people as you can. And also don't feel afraid of the fact that you might not have a traditional path. People say, well, I'm really interested in poetry, but I'd actually love to get into conservation. You think conservation needs everyone. It needs all sorts of people with all sorts of different skills. And there is a space for like poets in conservation, how they could use that to reach a totally different audience. So I think while our paths probably have been actually quite traditional, I guess, originally, we've had to learn a lot on it. And I think it's made me realize that there is a huge space for a huge number of different people with different paths into conservation and to provide that overall value.
We seem to have lost our host. So I'm going to ask the next question. Well, as we heard you both say, you have both a lot of experience, over 20 years each, and we would like to know what's the biggest difference between the reality in conservation and what you initially thought that lion conservation would be about. Amy, can you take it off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jane, and thanks for stepping in. Yes, I think the biggest misconception I had that like lion conservation would mainly be about lions, which it really isn't. And as we know now, and it's so obvious looking back on it, it's much more about people. I think that's true for most conservation issues. But when I first flew out to Africa, I mean, I look back and I just shudder with how naive I was. I remember flying over, looking through that, you know, little scratched plastic plane window, and I could see as I was coming into land, you know, the clouds were parting and I could see this savannah out in front of me, and I was so excited. I remember thinking, wow, there are lions down there, there are elephants down there, you know, I wonder if I squint if I could see one of them. And I didn't think, and it is shameful looking back, I didn't think for a moment about how many people were in that landscape that I could see. You know, that was kind of just totally aside from me, from the conservation side of things. And if anything, at the beginning, I kind of felt they were getting in the way. You know, people were kind of the problem. Obviously, through a lot of experience of doing conservation, and Laurie was amazing at this as we went through, just understanding that, of course, people, although all of us create problems for wildlife, it's the people that have to be the solution. And it's only through putting people at the heart of the solutions that we can get somewhere in conservation. So that's been a complete about turn for me, and that understanding that reality.
Very well. Sorry about that hiccup. My Wi-Fi just threw me off. Okay, let's carry on. Now, how did the merger of lion landscapes come about, Alayne?
Yeah, so it came about for several different reasons, really. There was a decision that was rooted very much in in our shared ethos that collaboration is better for conservation. And this kind of stemmed very much from Amy and I being founding members of the Pride Lion Conservation organisation, and we worked together a lot then on trying to use proper collaboration and develop proper collaboration between all of our different projects. And so it was a natural step for Amy and I to go, okay, well, we're already working together within Pride. How do we take that one step further and actually merge our two projects to be one organisation? And that's the kind of more romantic side of why we made the decision. But there was also a lot of sort of practical reasons behind that as well. Starting a charity is very hard. So when, Amy's projects were first under the university, and then when that wasn't going to work anymore for reasons in Tanzania, it made a lot of sense, rather than start another separate charity, to instead bring those projects and merge them with the work that the Lion Landscapes Mark I was already doing. And so those really are the reasons that we originally started to merge our two projects together. And little did we know what lay in store for us. We thought, okay, this is going to be really easy. We do all the work already. How hard can it be? But there was a lot of sort of administrative tasks to do that behind the scenes, and we definitely wouldn't have done it without some very capable volunteers helping us, namely Maureen and Joni, who kept us all on, in line to do that. And actually made us a much, much more professional organisation. And I think a learning point for Amy and I was definitely realising that we're both very bad at organisational admin, and in fact, organisation of any sort at all. And running large organisations is very different to running small ones. So a really key benefit from the merger was enabling us to expand the team and find people who are much better than we are at different aspects of the work. And I think that's a really great feeling.
Yeah, sure, that is. So I think that brings us to this point of, you trying to make the organization look professional. So what made you want to do like a formal strategic planning process, Amy?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so as Alayne has talked about just there, so she and I had a lot of shared history working together, knowing each other through Oxford, and working together as the Pride Lion Conservation Alliance, sort of with the other members there. And so it was a very natural evolution for she and I to be talking about how we both felt with our individual organisations, that we wanted to scale up, that we wanted to have more impact, that we really wanted to work more closely together. And then I remember in Kenya, we were sitting together and talking, and we had this, what seemed a brainwave, an obvious brainwave of bringing the organisations together and forming one proper collaborative organisation, and really seeing if then it was true that, if we joined forces, that we would get more impact, more funding, etc., etc. So we were all excited. But we didn't really think about the fact, was everyone else excited? Were they as bought in? Had we brought people with us on that decision rather than just making it? And it was only about 6 months later that we suddenly thought, gosh, we haven't really done this in a properly consultative way. We haven't thought about how to respect everyone's decisions. By then, it was a big team that we were bringing together, and we wanted to make sure that people were fully part of that and engaged in it and saw that bigger vision, or if they saw problems with the vision, that we understood that as well. So then we decided to do the strategic planning, both to think, how do we actually get step by step towards achieving the goals that we want? And how do we make sure that it's not just Alayne and I's vision, that it's truly a team effort, it's a team vision, it's a team goal, and we make sure that we are all properly committed towards, collectively working together towards a shared vision. And to achieve that, you have to have those strategies laid out, you have to discuss them, you have to develop them. And so we worked with Silly, which was fantastic, to actually enable us to do that. So it was really helpful to have the whole team together as actually developing those things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Alayne, tell us more about this shared mission and the vision for the future.
Yeah, Paul, I think it's good to share a slide here because it gets confusing. So thanks for doing that. But when we were all together, as Amy said, we spent a lot of time together with Silly, sort of guiding us through the process. And the mission we came up with a team during this process was that we wanted to really make large carnivore conservation valuable for both local and global communities. And this is because, there were a lot of threats to large carnivores, but a sort of overarching threat in a lot of the landscapes, certainly all of the landscapes we work in, is that they end up costing people that live alongside them a lot more than the benefits that they bring in. And the cost can be from anything from losing livestock or even threatening human lives. And so they're really significant costs. So how do we bring the sort of global value for large carnivores and bring that down to the grassroots level and translate it into benefits that are really important to the people that have to live alongside large carnivores, so that they see real benefits in doing this. And so that's really why we decided in the end that that was our mission. And then, you know, our vision was these kind of wonderful landscapes eventually where both people and their livestock and large carnivores and wider biodiversity can really thrive.
Yeah, okay. Still on this mission, Emmy, could you tell us how Lion Landscapes will achieve this mission in practice?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And as we were having this process, we were just obviously bringing together all of our work and realizing that it can be quite a complicated story, because to achieve conservation, you've got to address lots and lots of different things. You know, we had everything from programs that looked at healthcare, education, investments in schools, school feeding programs, to looking at how you do more effective livestock production. We had scientific research, we had communication, we had all kinds of aspects, all of which are necessary, but can make it feel quite a complicated picture to sell. And that was something that through the strategic plan, we were thinking of how do we both internally work out what we do and how it fits under these different sort of categories, and how do we communicate that most effectively outside. So we decided that all of our work pretty much fell into one of three different pillars, and we called these stop the loss, reduce the cost, and unlock the value. And these are things actually that have been discussed at a Lion meeting in Florida, I think a year or two before. And we thought these really do encapsulate a lot of what we do, you know, obviously in conservation in general. So in terms of stopping the loss, you know, this is about trying to stop the killing of the wildlife, so things like snaring, poisoning, etc., stopping the conversion of natural habitat to non-wildlife based land uses, etc. So that's often the sort of the first stopgap measure. But if you're going to stop that loss in any long-term way, you've got to reduce the cost that wildlife imposes on local people. And so that's a lot of the stuff that matters most in that moment to local communities, things like reducing attacks on livestock, attacks on people. So making sure that they're not dealing with an intolerable cost of wildlife presence. And then if you want that to work long-term, you've got to actually unlock the benefits of wildlife presence. And this, it's never going to be enough just to make the costs lower. I often say to people, imagine if you had a gang of really aggressive, you know, burglars roaming around your neighborhood, you know, and the police come along, they give you a burglar alarm to put on your house. Now, you might feel a little bit safer in your house that night, but you don't feel any better about the presence of those burglars. You know, you don't think that this is suddenly a nice neighborhood to live in. It's much, much more effective, actually, if you have a really holistic approach where you can make sure that there are real benefits to the people who deal with the risks that are still always going to be posed by large carnivores and other wildlife. And this is things like the Lion Carbon, for example, so a premium carbon credit that was developed to give local communities additional value streams, lion-friendly livestock, where, you know, people will hopefully get more money back into their pockets from ranching livestock in a sort of a wildlife-friendly way, and things like our community camera trapping, where they are actually monitoring wildlife and getting community benefits that are directly linked to the presence of wildlife. So that was kind of our three core pillars that we thought summed up a lot of what we did. Alayne, have I missed anything? His internet is probably not good. Have I missed anything you want to add on to that?
No, I don't think so. I think really then sort of underpinning all of that, I think the next step is to look at what we had under that, and really at the very base of our theory of change, we realized that it was really important that we needed that strong evidence for conservation, because it's all very well to make conservation decisions based on the heart rather than the head, but you can rarely build really effective programs if you don't really understand the systems that you're working in. And also, if you don't have the information coming in that allows you to really monitor the impacts of what you're doing. I mean, all of our programs need to be evaluated the whole time we're working on them. to see, is it actually working what we're doing? And sometimes it isn't. And then we've got to be able to say, no, it's not. We're going to stop this program, or we're going to change this program. And so the strong evidence for conservation really sort of underpinned everything that we did. And that can include research or just local knowledge on the ground. And then above that, we realized there wasn't really any point in having all this great evidence if we weren't communicating it well to those that need to use it. So the next step up was this communication for change. And this is where we try and share any evidence that we have with our partners on the ground, with stakeholders, and more widely as well, so that we can all be really singing off the same hymn sheet and using the same basis for our decision making. And this communication really needs to be honest, and that's something that's not always easy, as we've found out. But it is always better. And so we've learned that it's always best to be 100% honest, even if it's not what people want to hear. And that sometimes leads us down some difficult discussion points, either with stakeholders on the ground or partners or wider community, sometimes donors. But we really are sort of married to sticking very, very closely to the factual evidence that we're able to gather and basing all of our programs on that. So it's not necessarily the easiest path, but it is the path that we're going to take as Lion Landscapes.
Okay, so collaborations also seem to be a very key part of Lion Landscapes ethos. Could you tell us more about why this is, Amy? You talked so much about this collaboration, sharing some of these communication with your partners. Please tell us more about why collaboration is very key to Lion Landscapes ethos.
Definitely, thanks, Paul. And it was something that was really key and actually sort of a founding principle of the Pride Lion Conservation Alliance. So we realised that all 6 of us who are Pride members were sort of sitting in our tents in different parts of Africa, struggling with the same issues, battling with the same problems, maybe trying solutions that weren't really working. We didn't understand why. We were replicating the same things, often without great success, often actually competing against each other for funding, for example. So it really created what we thought was quite a damaging model, where rather than openly sharing with different conservationists your successes, your failures, etc., if any one of us had a good idea, then we weren't going to share it with the other one, because that would become your USP. That would become you enabled to actually go and get grants maybe off it. And that competitive model just seemed like it was hindering conservation. And so Pride, we all took the step towards this open sharing in a very collaborative framework. And that's an ethos that both Alayne and I and everyone else in Pride have been really committed to. And certainly when we then formed Lion Landscapes, we wanted it to be really central to this, the idea that actually you should, if we're going to make change, if we're going to make change in the next 20 years or so that is necessary at the scale that's needed, at the speed that's needed, then we need to work together. We need to work well across the organisation and beyond the organisation with as many different partners as it takes to achieve change. And hopefully there'll be much greater efficiency then and greater impact if you actually share your resources, share your ideas, share your failures and learn from one another. And particularly within Lion Landscapes, you know, now we have these different sites that we work in, teams that work in different contexts, have different challenges. And that enables us internally as well, actually, to test these things in different places and to really work out which solutions tend to be fairly cookie cutter almost. You can pick them up and you can try them in lots of different places and they seem fairly successful, and which other ones need to be really tailored to the local solutions. So all of these things of just building an open, shared platform for us to do it, and really having that as the centre of our ethos, and making sure that partnership is the core of everything we do. So including with the communities, the governments, other conservationists, you know, and being much more about impact than kind of the egos and the logos approach. That was really fundamental to us, and I think will always be our real sort of core principle.
Very well. Just a quick reminder to our attendees who just joined us while the webinar was underway. You could share your questions, any questions that you could be having for Amy and Alayne. Just use the Q&A feature and type your question. Then we'll be taking the questions at the end of this first session. So I would like to ask you both, Alayne, Amy, what do you most like about these merged lion landscapes? Amy first.
Well, sort of as I touched on there a little bit, I mean, I think the opportunity that it gives, you know, beforehand I was working in Ruaha, which is wonderful, but it was one site, it was one place, it was one group of issues that I was having to tackle, and the team were having to sort of understand and try to work with. But working across different sites, it makes you get out of that box. It makes you think about solutions and challenges in other places. And so it enables us to test, as I talked about, conservation models that might be able to work. And if they can work across multiple different lion landscapes sites, then they might be able to work beyond Africa. They might be able to work with totally different species. And that's an exciting place to be, to really be driving forward innovative and scalable conservation. And so I think I really enjoyed the fact that we could become this bigger organization without losing what mattered to us. And because we had come from a lot of these open discussions in Pride about what mattered to us, what we thought made a good organization, that grassroots, that collective sort of very honest approach, it made us be able to grow this organization in the shape of all those things, which I'm really proud about and happy about. And I think just knowing as well that when you could grow something, we could grow something that was effective, obviously, but also quite passionate and fun and not all about us. You know, when originally it was Alayne or I sitting in our tents alone and everything comes to you, there's a real sense of freedom and being able to bring incredible people like Joni, like you, like lots of other people that we've been able to bring on now and get them to do the roles that they do and follow their passions in a really great way that makes the whole organization so much better than certainly I could ever have managed alone, or I think Alayne could have managed alone. So that really sort of positive culture, you know, I think helps everyone to grow, helps us to step back a bit and to be responsive and just hopefully have more impact in a way that goes beyond conservation in terms of what a good organization can look like.
And you, Alayne, very well said, Amy. Thank you for the compliments. Alayne?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to Amy, really. I think a big plus and something that we're very proud of is being able to demonstrate that collaboration really works, much as Amy was saying. I mean, that it really is the best way forward. It's something we've talked about for a very long time, but it feels great to just demonstrate it to this sort of level, and that we can really show that we are stronger together. So I think that's really exciting. And also, you know, the potential one day to retire. I mean, I joke here, but really the fact that, you know, together with our partners, together with all of our team, as Amy was mentioned, building a really strong team, building these sort of on the ground partnerships with communities and governments and other stakeholders, and having this really locally owned and driven conservation program or programs that are really integral and a sort of really integral and logical part of the conservation action that's going on the landscape. That is really exciting as well. And as Amy said, it's much more than just us, and it's much more than just lion landscapes, but it's really rooted in what the communities living with lions actually believe and want. And I think that's a really good thought, to think that we're actually working really hard to make ourselves redundant one day in some ways. And I think at the end of the day, that would be the biggest success we could ask for.
Thank you, Alayne. Attendees, thank you very much again for joining us. That brings us to the end of the first session. So would like to take the questions that you've submitted in the Q&A feature. So if you still have any questions for Alayne and Amy, or any questions regarding large carnivore conversation, you could put the questions in the Q&A and then we'll be answering them as they come. So the first question, I think this is directed to you, Amy, from Faraz Karim. He says, thanks for showing your valuable thoughts on conservation of big cats. Then he asks, how can he join the team? I think joining the team in conservation, I believe.
Yeah, thanks so much. And great always to have anyone who's keen to join. We have a lot of different ways of where people can engage in the team and join the team. So there's obviously opportunities that we post. If actual jobs come up, then we post those on our website. So you'll see opportunities come up there. There are other ways though of engaging with what we do. So for instance, we are growing our partnership approach. So if people, are working conservation organizations elsewhere, then we might be able to work with you in that conservation space in your existing organization, so that we can reach out and say, actually, how can we learn from one another, again, this kind of collaborative way. And essentially we're also developing things like mentorship programs over time and interns. So these are all things we're trying to think of, how do we get as broad a number of people as possible engaged in our work, but not just so Lion Landscapes is good, but so they can then take it on and develop conservation projects that they're passionate about.
Very well. Thank you for that, Amy. The next question from Laura Brown. I think any of you could answer this. How are you interacting with other Pride's programs today?
Yeah, so we're still working very closely with the other Pride programs. With Pride is still running and very strong. And as Amy was mentioning, the collaboration between programs and sharing all our successes and failures and not competing, that's all just as valuable as it was before Amy and I merged our programs. So we're just working with Pride now as Lion Landscapes rather than two separate organizations. But Pride is still running and going very strong.
Very well. The next question from John Meakin. What's your biggest achievement so far? Any of you could take that? What's your biggest achievement? Yeah.
And I think I feel forming this entity, it sounds like nothing, but I do feel forming this entity is a big achievement. And there was actually quite a lot of, I don't know, sort of pushback when we talked about it, was it actually going to cut down our fundraising? Was it going to, I don't know, that it wouldn't really succeed. And that came both for Pride and for Lion Landscapes, I think. So I think showing that actually working together and being willing to be much more open towards things rather than keeping everything for ourselves is hopefully a positive one. And we've seen that, I think, developing models with the local community, seeing the positive impacts we can have on the ground. Every time we see that, it's hugely exciting. And it's wonderful, I think, to see the teams grow as well. And that all these amazing people coming up and being, the leaders, so that eventually, as Alayne said, hopefully we can retire fairly soon and then see this incredible project grow without us needing to be there.
That's nice. There's a very interesting question that has just come up here from John Cotterill. What is the attitude of local communities towards hunting? What will be the effect of the recent ban on import of trophies into the UK have on conservation? I think that's a very good question, John. Thank you.
I think I'll let Amy take that one, because Amy's been talking about this at length lately.
Definitely.
Very practiced on this point.
Okay, so it's a complicated question, and it's obviously, there is no one view that any community has, I think, on something like hunting, and particularly, I guess, in this question, trophy hunting. The views on it differ massively between contexts, within a country, who benefits from it, who doesn't benefit, etc. So it's a really diverse, I think, set of attitudes towards it. I think in terms of the impact of this UK ban, if it goes through as it's proposed right now, then in itself, it probably won't have that massive an impact, because the UK is actually a relatively small market for trophy hunters. And so it probably, won't make that much difference. But actually what it could have a difference with is that then that bill becomes kind of a flagship at other countries to follow suit. And so, other countries will be pressured and say, well, the UK has already done this, so therefore, Finland's about to do it, so maybe Belgium should do it, etc., etc. And we already see the UK decisions being used in that way to kind of push other countries to do it. So I think if that happens, and then you see a much bigger push against the import of hunting trophies, say, to the UK, then it creates quite a few issues. Partly it's hypocritical, because a lot of these countries including the UK, use trophy hunting extensively at home, and none of them seem to be talking about banning it at home, but they seem to be undermining that model elsewhere. And in countries like Tanzania, that can have a really detrimental impact. So we've seen that between 2014 and 2018, half the hunting blocks in Tanzania, so about 150,000 square kilometers, were vacant. They were handed back to the government to manage. The government doesn't have enough funding to manage them well. So you see more poaching, more habitat loss, and all that revenue that would come in from the hunters is now not going into things like anti-poaching and habitat conservation. And poaching and habitat loss are much bigger issues than trophy hunting is. So that fear that it's a well-meaning bill, people do want to help protect particularly threatened species, but it could have all these knock-on impacts where actually it starts to undermine revenue for conservation in really, really important biodiverse landscapes without anything better on the table to replace it with. You know, people assume that just phototourism will sweep in. That's not the case. It doesn't happen in the vast majority of places. So that's partly why Alayne and I and all of our team spend a lot of time talking about this issue, but also focusing on novel streams of conservation funding. And I think there's a real need that we diversify. All the streams that we have at the moment don't nearly touch the sides in terms of conservation funding. So rather than taking ones away before we've got anything better, we should be spending a lot of energy on developing additional models which may eventually replace things like trophy hunting in some places.
Thank you for that, Amy. The next question from Timothy Mayo. Compliment, great job and congratulations all. My question is, how have you, or what do you do to ensure that there is no spread of diseases between livestock, carnivores, and humans? So he has two questions. That's the first. And the secondly, on camera traps projects, what are the challenges faced when implementing these?
I'll take the first one, Amy, if you can take the camera trap.
Yep.
Yeah, well, actually, we're not disease experts. There's no disease aspects of the work that we do. So we're not 100% the right people to ask that question to. But actually, there seems to be relatively little transfer between the wildlife to the livestock in the areas that we work in. There's a bigger worry between the other way, direction between domestic animals and the wildlife themselves. And so there are quite a few big vaccination programs at work, not ours though, because there are other people doing that. And it's all great work, but really we don't work particularly in disease. Amy, I don't know if you've had any disease work that you've done in Ruaha in the past.
Well, a little bit. We used to collaborate with the University of California, Davis on this. So they had a health and animal livelihood sort of initiative there, and we sort of collaborated with them a bit. It's partly why some of our benefits programs have been directed specifically towards livestock health, because obviously we know that's a major issue for local people, that they lose, at least in Ruaha, they were losing 9 times as much livestock to disease as they were to depredation. So it was really important for us to work with them to reduce diseases for the livestock, partly because, of course, that can be transmitted to wildlife and to people for a lot of those, but mainly because it was a huge economic pressure on those people. So by, again, addressing the needs of the people and putting those first, the aim was that then conservation would be seen as something that actually delivered a net benefit to local people.
Yeah, and veterinary care as well, linked to a livestock attacked by large carnivores as well, and being able to quickly go in and provide veterinary care if there is livestock that can be saved after an attack has a huge impact too. And that's something that we do.
Thank you for that. Next question from Lily Maynard. What was a lesson your team learned through the strategic planning process, specifically about making true impact in the modern conservation industry? That's a very interesting question. Thank you, Lily.
Oh, so
did you get that? Yep.
Yep, we did. I was also realizing we didn't actually answer the question about the camera trapping, did we?
Oh,
no.
No, yes.
Okay, I'll start with that one, and then I'm going to let Alayne talk about while I think about the most what lesson we've learned. So for the camera trapping programs, and one of the biggest issues, and I think this will resonate with lots of people who run camera trapping issues, that we have is theft of the cameras. So lots of people would steal them because they didn't feel very engaged with our original ecological camera trapping. And we realized later on we didn't do a very good job of explaining why we were doing it, building up community trust of having camera traps out there. Any one of us, if we had a camera put up in the areas we walk around each day, you might feel a bit sort of affronted that someone's taking your picture, you don't know why, etc. So we dealt with the theft. We also found at the time we were doing benefit programs, and while people liked the organization, they weren't tying it back to the actual wildlife. So then eventually we tied the camera trapping directly in with the benefits and had the communities run and manage it themselves. So that was a real step change in getting the communities to do the camera trapping, not us doing the camera trapping. And then, of course, there have been other issues still to some extent. There's still a little bit of theft. It's gone down quite a lot. There was actually more competition then about things like whose wildlife was being photographed. I remember talking to a community member, and they were saying, we put our cameras on the edge of this river, which demarcated the boundary between two villages. They said the village A sort of put their camera there and took a picture of an impala, but the impala was on the other village's land. So they said, well, this is unfair. You're now taking points for our wildlife. And so we had to constantly adapt it to the needs of the communities. Then we would say, right, you can't put more than cameras within, say, a kilometre of a village boundary. So you know that the animals you camera trap are your animals in your village, kind of thing. But just constantly being open. And every month we would have discussions with the villagers about how it was going, what the pluses, what the minuses were, so that it could be developed together and sort of evolve as a community-led project rather than just being driven by us.
I just see here that there's a note on the chat saying that Joni would like to answer this question from Lily. Is that right?
Yep, sorry, I missed that. Joni.
No. Oh, okay.
All right.
I thought you were going to save me there, Joni. No, I mean, it's a great question, Lily. And I think the biggest thing that it's made us really hone in on through this strategic plan process is the mission, the increasing the value that wildlife has to local people on the ground. And I think at the end of the day, unless we're able to do that, then we're not going to achieve our goals, no matter what we do. And so I think that has really helped us focus our work towards that end goal, and make sure that everything we do in some way is leading to that. And that was incredibly important. And it has made us also look more and more into these novel financial mechanisms that will allow us to give more value to wildlife, through carbon or biodiversity credits, or as Amy mentioned earlier, sort of lion-friendly livestock. And so it has really focused us in on that as well. Whereas I think in the past we were doing much more of our work was focused on stopping the loss and also on reducing the cost for local people, so protecting livestock, which is still an incredibly important part of the equation, obviously. But I think it has made us realise just how important that third pillar is, to increase the benefits directly linked to wildlife presence. And so I think that's probably the biggest, most important thing that we need to achieve.
Thank you, Alayne. Now the next question from Valentine Hansett. Practical issue we have on the ground here. We have a wounded lion that is going after easy prey, that is cattle. Kenya Wildlife Service, that is KWS vets, are too few and focused on rhino, and local lion landscapes vet is also overwhelmed by work. What could be possible to put into place aside from dispatching ranger team in the area? Alayne, I think you could take this.
Yeah, this is a problem that, we come up against often, and it's very difficult because it's a tough question to answer. Every different scenario is slightly different, and we have, at the end of the day, if there's a lion that's too old at the end of its life or injured and not going to survive and is causing more damage and more costs to community, then obviously the logical thing to do is actually to remove that lion. But it's something that a lot of people are incredibly uncomfortable to do. And actually KWS come under a lot of scrutiny if they do that. And so it's, in the end, you're left with lions on the landscape that are going to cause a lot of damage, cause people a lot of costs before they die naturally anyway, at the end of their lives. And it's something that we find is very difficult to manage. And so the best thing that we find in those scenarios is that we tend to collar the animal, because if we're able to know where that animal is, then people can avoid that animal. They can keep their livestock away from that animal. We know if that animal goes into an area where it's much more likely to kill livestock or even become a threat to people. And so being able to really, really closely monitor these animals, and also being able to share real-time data, not just keep it to ourselves, but to actually share that with the livestock owners in the landscape, so they're able to respond to it in real time, is really important. And so that's one thing that we do. We work very closely with KWS to do that. And then the data from this lion collars are shared through Earth Ranger platforms. And a lot of people on the landscape have these Earth Ranger platforms, or it's shared via mobile phone apps with livestock owners. And when there's communities where they don't have sort of good phone reception, then that will be shared through the use of rangers, trained rangers going into those areas if that lion moves into that area. But it's a difficult one to manage because often the lions are obviously operating mostly at night. And they cause a lot of their livestock predation at night, and it's difficult to be very responsive at night. And so it's not an easy scenario, but really close monitoring and sharing that monitoring data is probably the best way that we know to address that.
Thank you, Alayne. Yep, I think we are running out of time, but then I think we have just a couple of questions that we could be having time to answer. I'll take this one. I'll ask this one again. I think this one can be answered by Amy. Impressive work by Lion Landscapes. Given the challenges of habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict, and other lion mortalities, what is the future of Panthera leo in Africa? That is a question from Maina Mugo.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mina, and a really important question and quite a depressing one to some extent. We've just been involved with some colleagues at Oxford who were looking at the potential future of lions by sort of 2050, and it really depends on the scenario we take. I mean, and a lot of this depends for lions on what happens to protected areas. So this is both obviously national parks, trophy hunting areas, etc., and how intact those remain is a really important determinant of how well lions will do in Africa. So if you end up losing, obviously, say half the protected areas, and this again goes back to some of the trophy hunting debates, that if we get rid of the economic viability of trophy hunting areas without putting anything better in place, then we're very likely to lose a lot of those protected areas. And so if we say we lose half of them, then it doesn't look great for lions. They still will be there. I don't believe at all this kind of, you know, you hear people saying that lions are going to go extinct by 2050. I don't believe they are at all. But they will be increasingly constrained to a few big populations. At the moment, there are about 65 roughly lion populations across Africa, but a lot of those are small and scattered and have fewer than 50 individuals in them. So there are only 6 big ones that have at least 1,000 lions. And increasingly, as those pressures you mentioned build up, we're going to see it getting fragmented back and back towards those few big populations, which is what none of us want. So I think what we're trying to do as Lion Landscapes, and what many other partners are trying to do as well, is think, how do we maintain connectivity? How do we get new income sources for lions so that lions are seen, and many other species are seen, as an asset for those areas? The protected areas could eventually be more economically viable, you know, including through new income streams for them, things like biodiversity credits, etc. And how do we make sure ultimately that for the countries and the communities that live alongside these animals, that the benefits of maintaining this asset, you know, outweigh the costs? And that's very difficult as competition for land increases, as all the other pressures grow. So there's no getting away from the fact that we're in a challenging space. I think there will be a contraction of lion populations. There will be a reduction in many places. But if we can hold sort of the line through this, if we can show some really strong conservation ideas and opportunities, ironically, the people who keep having lions and other wildlife will be in a really good space for things like conservation financing in the future. This is a really important asset. So I think in time, these things will become more and more economically attractive, and therefore that might even have a bit of a rebound. But we've got to get to that space where we can show real financing mechanisms and other incentives for local people and for governments.
Thank you very much, Amy. Yeah, I'll quickly go through these questions. There is a very interesting one from Tim Teslaf. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Tim Teslaf. Delighted to hear a statement about poets, reminiscent of 17th century Scott Andrew Fletcher. If a man were permitted to make all the ballads he needs, not care who should make the laws. We are seeing the power of this today when influential voices magnify uninformed viewpoints. Any current thoughts on how to get the complex announced messages into the global conservation under your goal 4, objective 4 about communication? So very interesting question. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
I think I think, you know, it's really difficult because really it takes education about how these problems are complex. And often we try and simplify it down to easy stories for people to digest quickly, and particularly in our communications and fundraising, it's always like, well, how do we tell this simply? But at the end of the day, I think we need to really educate people about the fact that they need to embrace the complexity of these stories, and understand that a lot of the, beauty lies in that complexity. A lot of obviously the difficulties lie in that complexity too. And so I think it is more educating people to be willing to, dive into some difficult conversations and not have simple solutions. Amy, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
It's obviously something we battle a lot. And I think to some extent, you've almost got to get people who are influential on the side so that then they can use their platform as good. And I think most people don't want to share misinformation. They don't want to undermine people and wildlife. But, but simple stories are attractive, and particularly when there's sort of that confirmation bias that it leads into what you think must be right. It's easy to share something, have that sort of clickbait. The media has a lot to do with this. So getting the media to be better informed in how to communicate conservation stories is really important. And we were discussing with some journalists about how to get that messaging. There's been an interesting sort of push for this for the coverage of wildlife trade. So working with journalists to cover that better, because what people read in the media really influences them. And so if we can get to those influences, whether it's the media, whether it's certain people who are sharing those things and talk about the nuances, that can make a difference then. And most people understand that life is complicated, and conservation is no less complicated than any other area of life. So it's going to take a lot of sort of diverse options, but it is something that's really important.
Yep, very important. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Alayne. So 2 more questions to go. One from Susan Williams. When you do the camera traps rewards, where does the reward money come from? Is there a way to use technology to make that self-funding through something like social media views and ad funding? It's a very interesting question. Thank you, Susan. Amy, you could take that.
Yep, sure. I mean, it's something that at the moment, the reward money, as you touch on, comes from philanthropy largely. So we apply for grants, we have donors who supply that money, and people often say, well, is that sustainable? It's interesting because actually COVID showed us that when all the direct user kind of money dropped off, actually philanthropy was relatively sustainable at still funding this. But as we've touched on before, it's still never going to be sufficient. So we do have to scale up different funding models. And Alayne and I and other partners have been working a lot at how do we use technology to both monitor wildlife more effectively and then hopefully monetize that. You'll see things like biodiversity tokens, etc., that you could use to sell some of these things. There's lots of ideas of how to get this out there. We're still very much at the beginning of those discussions of what it could look like. So we haven't got the answers yet, but I think it's something that we're really focused on trying to develop those new streams and trying to reach new people and get conservation funding much more mainstream than it has been at present. Alayne, I don't know if there's anything I've missed there.
No, I mean, that's right. So it's finding these initiatives that link this really good data that we get from camera traps and other data sources to, to monetize that. And I think there are a lot of exciting things on the horizon that's going to allow us to do that in the future. I don't think we're quite there yet, but there are a lot of people working on it. And I think it is an exciting way forward.
Yeah, really exciting. The last question, we take the last question from Winnie Kiru. Winnie Kiru, congratulations for developing this excellent initiative. Collaboration, coordination, and cooperation seems to be your ethos. How have you managed to build this unique initiative in a conservation world where competition seems to be operating in this world? Thank you for that question, Winnie. Yeah, I think Alayne, you could take that.
Yeah, thank you, Winnie. It's a really important question. And actually, it's been easier than you would think, because as Amy was saying earlier, the traditional conservation model is competition, and we're all competing for the same funding sources. We're keeping our ideas to ourselves, etc., etc. And we did think that there would be resistance to this very collaborative model. And when we were working together with Pride, we got so many benefits from collaboration. We still get so many benefits from collaboration. But how can we demonstrate that? And actually, you know, we partner with so many people on the landscape, and it's really heartwarming to see how often when you sit down with people and you say to them, you know, we can do this better together. Can we work together on this? That how many people really want to do that, as long as they see you laying, as Amy said, your logos and egos to one side. And we really try and demonstrate that. And we give credit the whole time to anybody we partner with. We're trying to show that you know, we collaborate fully and the benefits of that. And there's a lot of people that understand that now, a lot of organizations that really see the benefits and really want to do this. I don't think anybody's happy in this sort of very competitive environment for conservation. And so I think there's a general desire for a more collaborative model. It's just being able to really embrace it and do it to the level which is necessary. And we're hoping to provide a demonstration of that in action, so people can have the courage to just say, okay, we can do this too. Amy, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add.
No, that was excellently put, definitely. And Winnie, I think, I mean, you've shown in your work as well, I think, how good this is, the stuff with We Africa. I mean, it's amazing to see. I think there's a real growth there. And this definitely wasn't just from us. I think Pride really had that ethos, all the people we've, you know, learnt from, especially Colleen and Leela and Shiv and Steph and all the others that have really shown that they believe in this model, and we believe in it too. We think, as Alayne touched on, we can be more effective, we can be happier, we can be just better conservationists if it's not about us and the individual hero model. It's much more about what can we do together, how is everyone's value recognized, and yeah, and making sure that, I think, people see the authenticity in that, really, and then they want to be with you throughout that journey. And that's what you need. You don't need a one-off donation of $50,000. We're not turning that down if anyone's listening, but we want that kind of long-term partnerships and relationships, and that's what you build with that collective trust.
Very well, very well. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Alayne. That brings us to the end of this session. Thank you so much for attending our webinar, Behind the Scenes with Lion Landscapes. We hope you have learned something useful. If you have any additional questions about our conservation work by Lion Landscapes, please do not hesitate to contact us using the contact details that are being displayed on your screen. I will let you know when we have the next webinar episode, and we hope you'll join us. Thank you very much. It was a nice time. Bye.